So in this video, we are going to see how can we install our primary domain controller on our knowledge train Sanfrancisco domain controller. And this is going to be our first domain controller, or we can also call it a primary domain controller. So let's get it started and see how can we install it. All right, so I am in the server manager right now. So one of the important things that I have to tell you here is that anytime you are installing a domain controller, you have to make sure that you have the right name for your server. Because if you're installing a primary domain controller and then later on you realize that the name that you selected is not right and you have to change it, that can be a big problem when you're running in a production environment. So basically, you're losing productivity and then you are causing issues. So the first thing that you do is you always check the name. And if you remember, we did set up the name in our previous videos. And another thing is that you have to make sure that you have a static IP address. So when installing a domain controller, always make sure that you have a static IP address. That is very important. And one of the other thing that you have to make sure is that you are logged in as administrator. So log in as administrator, make sure you have a static IP address, and make sure that you have the right naming convention for your server. So these are the most important ones that you need to do. In order to install that, what you can do is you can go to Server Manager. The very first thing that you do is you first install the role for the Active Directory services. So this is one of the steps that you have to follow. So I will go to Roles and then simply select Active Directory Domain Services. After adding this, press Next, Next, and simply do the install. So one thing to just mention here is that you will not be required to actually restart the machine after installing this, because basically what are we doing in here is we are just installing the tool or console for Active Directory. After installing this, this does not mean that this is going to be our domain controller and we can start joining PCs to this domain, or we can create user accounts for our employees, because this is just going to install the tool for us. And once the tool is installed, the next thing that we will do is we will have to make this as a domain controller. Alright, so installation is done, and you can see that additional steps are required to make this machine a domain controller. So it is basically telling you that you have to do some more configurations in order to make it as a domain controller. If you don't do that, then it's not a domain controller and it's not gonna work. Alright, so once you click there, you are basically coming up with three different options that you can select. And the very first one is add a domain controller to an existing domain. This is when you want to install additional domain controller, which we will be doing for our Sanfrancisco office, and we will be installing an additional domain controller for fault tolerance. So for fault tolerance and load balancing, you can install additional domain controller. So in most of the production environments, it is always recommended that you at least have one additional domain controller, so that if your primary domain controller goes down, you can actually use the additional domain controller and make that additional domain controller as a primary domain controller. So we will be testing that once we install the additional domain controller. And the second one, or the second option that we have in here, is add a new domain to an existing forest. Most of the times you may want to use a child domain, which we will be actually doing, or which we will be installing in our New York office as an example. And If you want to install a child domain, you can be simply click on this one. So another one is add a new forest. So this is our first time that we are installing an Active Directory. We do not have any Active Directory. So when you have a new domain, a new setup for your domain controller services, you always choose add a new forest. So when you click add a new forest, root domain name, this is going to be the name of your domain. Um, Most of the times that domain name comes through the company name, and then you can use .local, .com, .us, or .de, like any domain name you can use in here. But the best practice says that use the company name, and then if this is a Active Directory, this is an Active Directory that you will be using inside your organization, you can always use .local here. So you know this is a local Active Directory domain for your company, but you can use .com or any other names that you may want, subdomain names. So our company name is Knowledge Train, so I will use KT Knowledge Train and then simply .local. So this is going to tell me that this is a knowledge train.local domain. So you always use abbreviation because if your company name is too long, you cannot use that name in here. So you have to use this abbreviation where you put KT as knowledge train.local. I will put that and then I'll simply press next. What it will do in here is it will go and check to see if KD already exists in my organization. So other option that we have is forest functional level and domain functional level. So forest functional level and domain functional level are really important, and most of the times what you can do is you can choose like lower version like server 2008 for functional level, or you can use 2016, which is the greatest and the latest. One thing that I want to let you know in here is that when you use 2012, you can go further. If you want to change the functional level, you can go 2016. But if you try to go back to 2012, you cannot. So there is a possibility to upgrade, but there is no possibility to downgrade. Just remember that. Most of the applications that you will have in your production environment in your company, they may require a functional level that is 2008. I'm just giving an example in here, and most of the times most of the applications will not support 2008 functional level. They will support 2012. So you have to upgrade that. So if you're, for example, installing an email server 2016 and you have a functional level of 2008, it may not install, and it may tell you, hey, you need to upgrade your functional level in order to install Exchange Server. So most applications compatibility issues come there. So if you ask me what is functional level, so when the functional level of a forest or domain within Active Directory is raised, certain set of advanced features become available to users. So what are we basically doing in here? When you use Server 2016 functional level, you're basically using better features, higher features, or new features of forest functional level or domain functional level. So you're getting more features within the Active Directory. So Active Directory is providing you more features within the functional level. So that is one important thing that you have to understand. And another thing is domain name system. Do you also want to install DNS services? Uh, DNS services, which we already mentioned in our other lessons, that it is used for name resolution. So instead of using IP address, you can use name. And then, do you want to install global catalog? That's another option. You can see that this global catalog option is already grayed out. I cannot do anything. Why? Because you at least need one global catalog server in your organization or within your Active Directory domain controller. That is a must thing. So you need at least one. So that's why it's grayed out. You cannot change that because you really need it. Alright, so another thing that you need to do is you need to actually choose a directory services restore mode password. So this is one of the password that you have to set up and you have to remember, because this is a restore mode password. Whenever you want to restore the directory services, it will ask you, because let's just say that you have a situation where you have to go through directory services restore mode to do the restore, because you're having issues, difficulties. When you do that, when you go, like, you go to save mode, right? You go to save mode through your operating system. Same thing here, like you go to restore mode for directory services, and this is a password that it will be asked from you when you are trying to do the restore. So make sure that you remember that and you document it. So I'm going to type a password here, and I will remember this password. Whenever needed, I will use it to restore. Since this is a first time we are installing a domain controller, you can simply skip this message in here, DNS delegation. So we don't need that at the moment. And the next thing that it will do is it will set up the NetBIOS name for our domain, which should be KT. And this is going to be the name of our domain. And then the next thing that we have is going to be the path. And the path is really something important. So before I actually move forward, let me explain what is this NTDS path that you have for database and logs. So any user that you create, for example, you create a new object, and those objects are users and computer accounts that you create. Where are they going to be stored? They are going to be stored in C, Windows, and TDS. And then any log that is going to be generated, errors, informations, it is going to be stored in here. And then we have sysvol volume. It is a shared directory volume, which is going to be like shared, and each domain controller will actually have that. And sysvol will have group policy, login scripts, and a staging folder. So all your group policies, all your login scripts that you will create, login, log off scripts, it will all be in stored in here. What is the best practice, if you ask me? The best practice for me is always that I create a DB folder here, and I create a log folder here, and that is how I will be able to actually separate them. So I will know where is my database and where is my log. Um, you can change it. You can specify different location. If you don't want to do the C drive, you can do a D drive. You can always change that. But it is always important that you put a path where you can actually track those items in future very easily, and you don't have thousands of objects in just one folder and you don't know what are these. At the end, you can see that you have review selection, and you can simply see all the information. If you like it, go for it. If you don't, you don't have to. One of the important things that I want to tell you here, and one of the cool things, is that you can click on view script, and this is going to give you the entire script for all this configuration that we have done. So you can automate this process, because if you have a production environment or you're supporting a customer where you are installing a lot of Active Directory services, you can simply copy the script and then modify those parameters that you have there and use it for anywhere else. So automation is in there. You just copy and use it. It's really cool, and I really recommend that um, try try to install the Active Directory through the script. Um, all right, so at the very end, it will tell us that all prerequisites check passed successfully. There are some other warnings which you will get all the time, and you can see that they can be fixed, and they are going to give you all those errors, and then the link to actually fix those errors. So what I will do is I will simply press on install. Um, you can read these errors, and if you think it's fixable, you can fix it. If not, because like you can see that the DNS delegation error, this was something that we already know, so we are good with that. And it says at least has one physical network adapter that does not have a static IP address. We do have a static IP address, so I'm gonna skip that. So if you don't have a static IP address, you can go back and then use the static IP address to install your domain controller. So it will start the installation, and it will do the configuration and everything else. I'll just pause the video here. You can see it's checking if group policy management console needed and all those things. And I'll be back. Alright, so installation is done, and it's just telling me you're about to sign out because it needs to be restarted so that we can log in next time using our Active Directory domain credentials. The local account is no longer going to be there. So when you install Active Directory, the local account is no longer there. You basically can only use the domain controller credentials to log into that directory services server or Active Directory server. Alright, so the server is now restarted and it's applying computer settings. So for the first time, when you install Active Directory services or Active Directory domain controller, it takes some time so that it can build all those profiles, apply all those changes after the restart. Alright, so finally, took some time, but now we can log in, and this time you can see that it says KD/administrator. So what does it mean? It means domain/administrator. If I try to log in to this computer, uh, you can see that I'm not able to log in. So I only have the choice to log in to the domain because it's a domain controller. So with the domain controller, you cannot log in locally. Just keep in mind. Alright, so after I put in my credentials, now I am logged into a domain controller. This is no longer a local server. I mean, this is not a standalone server. This is a domain controller. This is still a local server on this machine, but this have now Active Directory services installed. Um, if I click on Start and go to Admin Tools, and here you can see that I have Active Directory users and computers. The shortcut is you can type dsa.msc. This will simply bring up the Active Directory users and computers. You can click on it, and then it should open up the Active Directory users and computers. Alright, so I have my Active Directory domain services installed, and this is Active Directory users and computers. And this is how you can install your first domain controller in your organization.